The first superhero I remember was probably Underdog. I grew up with Underdog on TV. A Saturday morning cartoon. Underdog was shoeshine boy by day, lowly little shoeshine boy who would transform into Underdog by taking uppers, as it turns out. The secret compartment of his ring he'd fill with an Underdog super energy pill. It's probably not the best role model for small children. And he'd frequently rescue his girlfriend, Sweet Polly Purebred, and he'd fight the bad guys and put them in jail, and skipping over the due process part of the law. But it was thoroughly grounded and very much poking fun at a 1950s vision of superheroes. A vision that maintained the status quo, that protected property rights above all else. Bad guys were robbers and thieves, and robbers and thieves were people who stole valuable goods from wealthy people often. Now, I was, as a preschooler, I didn't really understand that Underdog was very much poking fun at the original superheroes. And I also didn't understand that this isn't how superheroes started out. I didn't understand that superheroes by that time had been around for a generation and had undergone all sorts of transformations. But this is the danger when we don't understand history. In the last several years, there's been quite a lot of noise, a hue and a cry, mostly, I will say, mostly from white men, conservative white men, who don't like that their superheroes are suddenly espousing progressive values, or becoming women, or being represented by African Americans or other minorities. As if superheroes have only ever been white American straight men who have only ever protected the rights of wealthy people and the property of wealthy people and the status quo. When in fact, from the very beginning, superheroes have represented something much greater. They have always been champions of the underdog, champions of the people. They have always been Antifa, anti-fascist. And from very early on, in fact, from the very beginning, they've been full of immigrants and women and outcasts, superheroes, except for perhaps an aberrant period in the 1950s, have always represented progressive values. Well, how can that be, you might be saying to yourself? Doesn't Superman stand for truth, justice, and the American way? Well, yes. Yes. But immigrants are frequently zealots for the land that takes them in and gives them shelter. And isn't it interesting that in later comics, much later on, Superman renounced his American citizenship and realized that he was a superhero for the world. But let's go back to Superman because he is the original superhero. Superheroes are an American phenomenon. Superman first appeared in the 1930s. And Superman in the 1930s, in those first comic books, he did fight against thieves. But the thieves he was fighting against were the corporate thieves. It was the Depression. He was fighting against corporate greed. He was fighting against those who were stealing from the people. He was putting corrupt officials in jail. He was capturing those bad guys. Was Superman a socialist? Now, by the time I saw Superman on TV, I was watching the 1950s TV shows in reruns in the 1960s. And that Superman was largely defending the status quo. He was defending property rights. But I say to you, that was a sterilized Superman, an aberration. The original Superman. The original Superman was fighting for the people. The first Captain America, Steve Rogers, appeared in March 1941, before the United States even entered World War II. And on the cover of the first Captain America comic book, he was punching Hitler. You can't get more anti-fascist than that. Now I wonder, what was your first encounter with a superhero? Who were the superheroes of your youth? And perhaps you have a favorite. And in fact, we're gonna talk about that now before we proceed. I'm going to talk some more, but I want to know who your favorite superhero is, because there's a whole universe, several universes of superheroes out there. So we're going to put an answer garden question in the chat. And I know we've done this before. And if you're visiting us for the first time, you don't know that we've done this before. But don't put your answer in the chat. Go and click on the link in the answer garden. Go click on the link that Seth just put in the chat and fill in who your favorite superhero is in that link. And then we're going to get a word cloud to see who our favorite superheroes are. Okay, so click on the link in the answer garden. Click on the link in the chat and you can fill that out. And we're going to look at that at the end of the service today. And we'll see who our favorite superheroes are. Now, our reading this morning was from an interview with Josh Mensch, who was the writer and the showrunner of Superheroes Decoded. And much of today's research for this sermon comes from that two-part series from the History Channel, Superheroes Decoded. You can watch that. It's available if you subscribe to the History Channel's service, or also available on Amazon Prime. And more research also comes from countless hours spent watching Marvel movies and television shows and reading Marvel comics. I lean towards the Marvel superheroes myself, if you haven't guessed. In that documentary, Superheroes Decoded, Paul Levitz, the former CEO of DC Comics, said, "All popular culture reflects the times that it's created. All popular culture reflects the times that it's created in. Great popular culture helps us change the times that it lives in. Great popular culture helps us change the times that it lives in." So there's Captain America showing up and punching Hitler in the face before we even entered the Second World War. We were clearly helping the war effort with our allies before we entered. But there's Captain America helping out. Well, Steve Rogers is white, clean-cut guy from Brooklyn. He's still a white superhero, but he eventually ends up with a sidekick, and his sidekick is black, and that's the Falcon. And we learn much later, it should be apparent early on, but we learn much later that Captain America's real superpower doesn't come from the serum that gets him all beefed up and makes him physically strong. His superpower is being Steve Rogers. His real superpower, his real superhero-ness comes from being the good person that Steve Rogers is. How do we know this? Well, in a few ways. One is that He is worthy to lift Thor's hammer. Only the worthy can lift Mjolnir. And Steve Rogers can lift it. Wow. That has nothing to do with him being beefed up or having had serum. It's because he inside is worthy. And another way we know that is in the recently released TV series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Steve has grown old. We need a new Captain America. And the powers that be have chosen someone because although Steve Rogers wanted to pass it on to the Falcon, originally he said no. So the powers that be at the Pentagon, they chose someone else who turns out was not worthy of the name. He could carry the shield, he could make appearances, but he couldn't be Captain America. And through these comics and movies and characters, we can explore the complexities and the nuances of racism, of what it really means to be a hero. Of the inner turmoil that people go through. So far, we've been talking about the white men. You should also know that Wonder Woman first appeared in 1941. And Wonder Woman, unlike the other superheroes, wore no mask, carried no shield. She appeared as she was. Oh, yes, she went about her day as regular Diana, but in her superpower mode, she bared herself, as it were, an Amazon. Now, many of these superheroes drew directly from Greek mythology and from the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. They follow the template of the hero's journey. They leave home. They do many things solo. They go on a quest. Or in the case of Thor, Norse mythology. And that's great for the geeks among us and those of us who like to say, oh yes, I love Thor. I love how closely Thor follows the Eddas and how closely he follows the actual stories of Thor and Loki. But more important than that, are the stories that they help us tell ourselves, the things that they help us discover about ourselves. Wonder Woman empowered women. It was the age of Rosie the Riveter. She was strong, powerful, amazing. And what happened in the 1950s? Well, they tried to put her in a box, and it was awful. In 1947, at a time when comical depictions, and I do use that word intentionally, when comic depictions of Black people were all very much in the way of mocking and minstrel shows. There was a publication of all Negro comics, one comic book. It was very popular, and it showed African Americans in a much better light, being superheroes, being real people. And it sold very well. And it was such a threat to white people, that they weren't able to produce a second edition because no one would sell them newsprint to print it on after the first edition. There were no more Black people in the comics until Stan Lee integrated his comics in the 1960s. Now, Stan Lee introduced the Black Panther in the Fantastic Four. And that happened in July 1966. And he had other Black people in the comics before this, but he introduced the Fantastic Four, the Black Panther, in July 1966. And that was 3 months before the rise of the Black Panther Party. He introduced Luke Cage in 1972. After Trayvon Martin was shot, a few years later, Luke Cage started wearing a hoodie. It was important for a superhero to be seen, a Black superhero, to be seen wearing a hoodie. And Marvel rebooted Ms. Marvel, who is now a Muslim teen named Kamala Khan. Teen angst was a big issue in the 1960s, and that gave us Spider-Man. So in recent years, when Marvel decided to introduce a female Thor, well, that's not really that big a deal, and not really out of character for the comics or for what they've been trying to do all along. They have always been pushing the envelope, except for that aberration in the 1950s. So I wonder why people feel so threatened. What is it about powerful women, powerful religious minorities, powerful people of color, people standing up for themselves, that makes the folks who have always held power feel threatened? Well, it's changing the status quo. These superheroes are leading the way for us. They are asking us serious questions about ourselves. They are revealing our innermost fears, and they are showing us what we can do in the world. Are you worthy? If you would lift this hammer, there is work for us to do. There are still people who are oppressed. There are many injustices. We can be the hero. And as Steve Rogers shows us, it's not the serums or radioactive spider bites or super gadgets that turn us into superheroes. It's the work that we do. Are you with me? Will you help me to heal the world? Namaste.